This forecast is brought to you by me. For information on readings I offer, such as birth chart readings, couples readings, locational readings, and more, you can check out my website at manic.mercurian.net, or you can reach out to me directly at manic.mercurian@gmail.com, and all of that information, as always, is in the description box below. Welcome to your astrological forecast for the week of Monday, October 31st through Sunday, November 6th, 2022. This week, as you've noticed, I'm calling this forecast the eye of the storm. I know that sounds a little bit cliche, but it is so kind of dead on accurate for this week. We've already experienced the brunt of this metaphorical storm, so to speak. That happened last week with the new moon solar eclipse at 2 degrees Scorpio. That was really like the beginning of, pushing us into this new, these new changes, the new paradigm, this new chapter that is about to kind of unfold, that's kind of being pushed upon us, or that we're being ushered into. So all of that really began gaining momentum very rapidly last week, and probably the most intense part of this eclipse season will actually be the full moon lunar eclipse next week. So this week we're kind of just like in the middle between those two events. We don't have any eclipses going on this week at all, but we're right smack dab in the middle of the two eclipses of this eclipse season. To further intensify the things this week, we have Mercury now in Scorpio. So Mercury has joined Venus and the Sun in Scorpio, and then all three of these inner planets, Venus, Sun, and Mercury. I know technically Sun isn't a planet, but whatever. All three of these inner planets, so to speak, will be crossing the South Node this week. So if you don't know what that means, basically the South Node marks the middle point of the eclipse season, so to speak. So in other words, an eclipse is basically a new moon or a full moon where the sun and the moon are close to the eclipses. So the way I look at it is Sun crossing the South Node this week marks the exact middle point of the eclipse season. And, to add on to that, we also have Venus and Mercury crossing that same point. So this is dark stuff. I'm not going to lie to you. This is intense. Scorpio really drives down. I'm picturing like a jackhammer, like going straight down. Another metaphor would be, Scorpio has X-ray vision. So it really gets into like the nuts and the bolts. How does something actually work? How do you work? How does your life work? What are the kind of like, I don't know, darker or less glamorous fundamental parts of how your reality works? Because that's what we're going to be focusing on. And that's where there's going to be these intense changes. And as I said in the last week's forecast, just in general for the next couple weeks as well, look to where Scorpio falls in your chart, because that is by far like the biggest place where everything is kind of going on right now. Not only because of last week's new moon solar eclipse, but also, again, we have Venus, Sun, and Mercury all in Scorpio crossing the South Node. So this is karmic. These are, fateful things going on. There's things are changing. Speaking of changes, we do have a first quarter moon at 8 degrees Aquarius this week. So, we don't have any new moons or full moons, so we don't have any eclipses this week. But I'd like you to keep in mind that during eclipse season, the whole lunar cycle is amplified and intensified. So, just like a new moon solar eclipse is basically a more intense version of a new moon, and a full moon lunar eclipse is a more intense version of a full moon, during eclipse season, when you have a first quarter moon like we're having this week, that is intensified as well. And I know everyone likes to kind of overlook the quarter moons, but quarter moons change things very dramatically as well. They're very tangible, even just on a regular basis when you're not in eclipse season. So all that being said, my point is I'd like you to pay special attention to this first quarter moon for multiple reasons, because this is going to be more sudden change, growth, changes more. It's going to be a demand for action on your part, on all of our parts. First quarter moons make us restless. They can make us stressed, but they can also make us willing and able to make dramatic change and sudden change. So that's where the focus is going to be. But also something to pay attention to for this first quarter moon is that first quarter moons are basically the what do you call it? Like the tilting point, the tipping point, where whatever kind of started to creep in on the new moon, some kind of idea or feeling, some kind of something, going on behind the scenes, that reaches critical mass when you get to the first quarter moon. And this is always true, but because we're in eclipse season, this is extra important to follow. So whatever happens on the day of this first quarter moon this week will be extra telling, on seeing what this whole eclipse season is about for you, what this whole lunar cycle is about for you. Okay, one last way of putting this before I get into the day by day here, but another way of putting it would be this first quarter moon, whatever goes on there, it will tell you basically something that actually started last week with the new moon solar eclipse is gonna bring a lot of changes this week, and whatever that is also going to reach culmination and become a really big deal next week when we get that full moon lunar eclipse. So just pay attention to that. Yeah, a lot to talk about, so let's get into the weekly forecast here. Okay, on Monday, October 31st, moon will leave Capricorn about midday. You can actually see here I have this chart set for 12:45 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and this is pretty much the exact moment when the moon leaves Capricorn and enters Aquarius. So this is really interesting. I mean, all the phases of the moon and the signs of the moon are very telling during eclipse season, as I kind of alluded to before. I was talking in the last forecast about moon in Capricorn over the weekend of the 29th and 30th. And, it was this weird kind of situation where, the moon is in detriment in Capricorn, sun is in Scorpio, which is kind of a difficult energy, I would say. Both Scorpio and Capricorn are very, perseverant and ambitious. They are working toward the future. They're very strategic. And they have to be all those things because, that's what is demanded of them by the energy represented by, these signs. So it's tough stuff. However, we did have this really beautiful sextile between the moon and the sun. So there's like this kind of bittersweetness I was describing for the weekend, okay? Bittersweetness of finding peace or finding pleasure in the kind of nitty-gritty aspects of reality, or in planning or something, and being responsible, or in choosing wisely how you invest your time, energy, money, etc. So all that continues on Monday morning, but then it does change as moon enters Aquarius. Now, Aquarius is very similar but also very different from Capricorn. And also there's a difference here in the angle that Aquarius and therefore the moon are going to make to the sun here as well. So Aquarius is ruled by Saturn like Capricorn, so it continues a lot of those shared themes of, having to think about the future, and again, we still have that cluster in Scorpio. So combining this cluster of Scorpio planets with the moon in Aquarius, we're still focused on like, I want to say like survival, like a survival mentality, like thinking about the future, making sure we're planning, everything's good. But the difference between Capricorn and Aquarius, moon in Capricorn versus moon in Aquarius now, is that, Aquarius is much lighter. It's an air sign, so there are more possibilities. There's more room to be spontaneous and a little bit experimental maybe. And this is where it gets really interesting, because combining Scorpio with Aquarius gets really wild. Both of these signs have a Uranian connection. They sort of butt heads. They form a contentious aspect with one another, but they have a lot in common as well. What I'm getting at is we're already gearing up for this first quarter moon, because the moon is already in the sign that it will make this exact aspect in. As a matter of fact, very, very early on Tuesday is when that exact first quarter moon will happen. I think it's a little bit after midnight Eastern Standard Time. So we will already be experiencing this on Monday. Even though technically the first quarter moon doesn't happen until very early Tuesday, it will be tangible on Monday. Monday is going to be a wild day. It's going to be a wild start to the week. Very unpredictable, very strange, very unusual. And I think I have covered it in detail, but just to run through it really super quickly, the reason being is because not only are we in an eclipse season, but we're also gearing up for this first quarter moon, which, throws everything up into the air again. And the first quarter moon is involving the moon in Aquarius, which is super unpredictable, with not only the sun in Scorpio, but we've also got Venus and Mercury in Scorpio as well. So both Scorpio and Aquarius have to do with, sudden changes, sudden evolution. They also have to do with countercultures. They have a little bit of a rebellious streak to them. Both of these signs delve into whatever's weird or obscure, whatever's super far out there. So anyway, I think that's enough said. But definitely on Monday, a weird start to the week. And, it's one of those things where it's not just going to be, a little weirdness and then we'll be done and get over it. This is starting some weird unpredictability that it's only going to get more interesting as we get into the week here. Yeah, I think that's enough said for Monday. Let's go on to Tuesday here. So Tuesday, November 1st, we start out the new month with Moon in Aquarius, of course. And then like I said, during Monday's interpretation here, very, very early on Tuesday, we get that exact first quarter moon, aspect. So basically the moon makes a square to the sun at 8 degrees Aquarius. So super, super early in the day. But again, this will be felt all throughout the day here. Moon is still, relatively close to that aspect all day. So again, this brings about change, the need for sudden change. Not only do Scorpio and Aquarius both deal with themes involving change and evolution, growth, sudden like enlightenment or shifts in perception and awareness, epiphany, etc. Not only do these signs deal with those themes anyway, but also first quarter moons fundamentally require us to make sudden changes. There will be sudden changes in your environment, in your life, so you have to adapt. You have to roll with it. Yes, these are fixed signs, but Scorpio and Aquarius are probably the less consistent of the fixed signs. They can have like a very fixed, consistent streak, but then both of them can change, super dramatically overnight as well. These are the signs that kind of deal with like earthquakes and just big things like that. So November 1st, my advice to you is honestly, it's interesting because as weird as what's going on, as weird as it is, like all the things that are going on right now with these planets and the eclipse and everything, my advice for Tuesday is pretty much the same as it would be for any first quarter moon. This may make you feel restless, anxious, stressed, especially if you're prone to these things already, or if you have a lot of fixed signs in your chart. You'd be a person who likes consistency, and this is going to be targeting you specifically if you do have a lot of fixed signs in your chart. But even for the rest of us, this will be a kind of like nail-biting type of energy. So my advice to you is it doesn't have to be a bad thing. Like none of this has to be a bad thing. That's the whole point of looking at these charts with you guys. It's just that this is asking us to make change. There has to be growth. I know it's comfortable to just rely on our same habits and, the same things that support us in life, but we have to grow. I think, I don't even have to preach that. Like if you're here and you're interested in astrology, I think you already know that we have to be constantly changing, adapting, and growing, etc. So anyway, that's all you have to do on Tuesday. Just be very open because things will not go as planned. Maybe make a plan if you want, but just be open to, Murphy's Law. Like if it can happen, it will happen, especially on Tuesday, and especially not only Tuesday, but this week as well as really this whole month, So just be open, go with it, be flexible, be a little open to some weirdness. This is like the spice of life. And I would say, this is an energetic time. So my advice is always, it's not a good time to like rest and reflect. That's just not what this is about. It's go time, as I said in my last week forecast. It's time to, get in there, make some change, like do something. If you had something on the back burner that you're waiting for an opportunity to find a good time to start, this is your window. This is an excellent time to start something, do something, whatever you feel in the moment, I'm not saying you can't think things through. Like obviously we have to be precautious, take precaution and all that. But this is action oriented energy. So just keep that in mind. Okay, moving right along to Wednesday, November 2nd. By looks like, afternoon Eastern Standard Time, Moon will already be headed out of Aquarius and then entering Pisces. This is such a different dynamic too. It's such a shift from Aquarius to Pisces. And again, this changes the dynamic of how the moon relates to the sun or how the moon aspects the sun. As the moon enters Pisces, I really actually kind of like this because, let me just start by saying, being in eclipse season, I think it's so awakening and tantalizing. Like, yes, it can be stressful and chaotic. There are downsides, of course. It can be scary, maybe, but it can be so invigorating. All this change, especially with Scorpio as well. It's a sign that I think has to do with change. Corresponding to the middle of fall in the northern hemisphere. So there's so much change. There's so much to awaken your mind and your heart and soul. And, all of that is awakened with Scorpio as well as eclipse seasons. And, now we're getting both. So there's so much to awaken all of that. But now as the moon enters Pisces, this is probably the one sign more than any other that delves into spirituality and intuition. These are a lot of similar themes shared with Scorpio. These are both water signs. So Sun in Scorpio is a water sign. Moon in Pisces, it's now in a water sign as well. So suddenly we have this abundance of water energy, especially because, again, Mercury just recently entered Scorpio. So we've got Venus, Sun, Mercury in Scorpio, Moon in Pisces. It will later cross over Neptune and Jupiter. But yeah, I love this. Of course, this will be difficult if you don't have a lot of water in your chart. But if you do, if you can be open to this really kind of emotional, intuitive, spiritual focus or mini chapter, let's say, I think this can be really interesting, especially because the moon is going to start to trine the sun. This is a really strong, harmonious aspect. This is the easiest aspect. Trines are easy. It's kind of like your reward. Like, astrology has taught me that, every hard time is followed by a good time. If you already dealt with the exciting but challenging time brought on by the first quarter moon in Aquarius. Now that the moon enters Pisces, it's an easy aspect, so it's hard, then it's easy. It's hard, then it's easy. We had that kind of chaotic energy pushing us to make change. Now we get a little bit of harmonious energy. And kind of just enjoy this because it's almost like a little break before things will intensify again. And I think this is perfect too. One last thing about that is, I always love Moon in Pisces. Moon is technically not in domicile in Pisces, but Pisces deals with so many themes that are shared by the moon. It's a water sign. It deals with intuition, spirituality. It's kind of a softer, kind of warm sign. So it's perfect for the moon to be in. Moon, which of course also deals with emotion, intuition, spirituality. Moon is technically at home in Cancer, but there's a lot of shared themes with Pisces. So this looks really beautiful, especially if you want to, embrace your intuitive or creative side, if you want to get a little artistic. And I always say, like, even if your lifestyle, your career, even if all that doesn't really deal with creativity or art necessarily, this is still a beautiful time for getting inspiration, for maybe coming up with like a new idea, a new way of looking at things, or some kind of, new inspiration, basically. So I think this can be really useful for all of us here. So anyway, in short, Wednesday looks like still intense. We're still on the pressure cooker. Like, there's still so much going on. It's very theatrical, chaotic, dramatic. But at the same time, Wednesday, we get a little bit of harmonious kind of, we can be a little softer with all this water energy. Okay, that's all I can say for Wednesday. Let's go forward. Thursday, November 3rd. Moon is still in Pisces, and you can see it's approaching Neptune and later Jupiter. It won't cross through both of those today, but it is approaching. And I wanted to kind of point out really quick here. So if you look up here, Venus, Sun, and Mercury are getting closer together. Well, technically Venus is separating from the Sun, but Mercury is getting closer to the Sun. And not to jump ahead too much, but on the full moon lunar eclipse happening next week, Mercury will be exactly conjunct the Sun for the full moon. And you can see the moon is already kind of approaching. It's only 2 signs away from where it will be a full moon lunar eclipse. So I just wanted to point that out, that, like, you'll experience this as well here on Thursday, as well as other parts of the week, where everything is kind of being set in motion and beginning, and everything is starting to line up to this huge change that's about to really hit the fan next week. So on the one hand, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, but on the other hand, this is important to know. If you see it that way, I think it'll be very interesting that everything is kind of lining up. If you think it's been crazy already by Thursday, this is just I would say it's setting the stage, but at the same time, it's like the play or whatever has already begun. At the same time, the show has already started, but we're not at the climax yet. I guess I could say. So the show has started. It started last week, really. We already did the planning, the preparation, everyone memorizing their lines, so to speak. I don't know if that really works as an analogy, but we already put in all the work. In the last several months. The show started last week. It's not fully climaxing yet, but everything is being set up for this really grand finale that's gonna happen next week. Anyway, but as for Thursday specifically, we do have Venus crossing over the South Node, so Venus is gonna be the first one of the three. Venus, Sun, and Mercury to cross over the South Node. So this is just significant because yeah, let me kind of illustrate it for you. So Venus is the goddess of love and beauty. She, grants us abundance and pleasure and all these themes that are really easy to deal with and just accept. That's pretty much what Venus teaches us. All you have to do is just accept like love and pleasure and, just welcome it. But she is debilitated in Scorpio. So we can't so readily access this love and pleasure and abundance. We can't just, you know, find it all around us and welcome it with open arms. We have to work for it. Venus is in Scorpio, so we have to deal with scarcity, and we have to be smart. We have to be intuitive. We have to be cunning. So that's kind of Venus in Scorpio. But then now Venus crosses through the South Node, so it's kind of like plunging into the underworld, so to speak. Technically, it's reaching the point where the moon plunges into the underworld, but still, there's all these themes of like underworld and scarcity and depths and darkness. So I chuckle, but that's how I deal with these things. So don't take it the wrong way. Anyway, so the way I would say, the way I would interpret this is, Venus, especially like worldwide, it represents finances, wealth and abundance and all that. So Venus being in such a debilitated placement, especially with Jupiter still retrograde at this point, which also has a lot to do with abundance. Like both the planets supporting our abundance and wealth are not in places that are natural to them. In other words, like we still can definitely find abundance, but we must find it in obscure places we wouldn't usually look, places we haven't traditionally relied upon. Does that make sense? So I wouldn't see this as bad and saying like, oh, there's no wealth or prosperity or abundance to be found. It can definitely be found. It's just not how it normally can. And there's this sense of like darkness or, we may feel estranged. We feel like outsiders to ourselves. But again, this can be good though for seeing things outside of the box. If everything just goes as planned all the time, we would never grow. You can just keep doing the same old thing all the time. It would be boring, So yes, maybe this is challenging. Maybe it's uncomfortable. Maybe it's even alienating. But at the same time, this is necessary for our evolution and to move on to something greater. Okay, yeah, that's really what I see for Thursday. Still, we have, this what I was saying is kind of darker related to, Venus crossing the South Node. But again, it doesn't have to be bad. And keep in mind, we still have this trine. Moon is trining Venus today as well. Moon is also technically trining the Sun too. We have a waxing trine between the Moon and the Sun. So water trines, do you have a lot of water in your chart? If so, this is going to be your time to shine, and it's going to be very interesting and exciting for you. If not, this is going to be a little bit harder for you. If you don't have a lot of water in your chart, you may not be as readily accepting of like deep intense emotion like this. But I don't want to sound like a broken record, but just roll with it. Just go with it. It's going to be weird. It's going to be unusual. It's going to be dramatic. You have to just kind of go with it. Everything is changing right now. Friday, November 4th, Moon moves into Aries. Okay, this is where it gets really intense. I keep saying that, but we had a relative lull with Moon in Pisces on Wednesday and Thursday. We're in this pressure cooker, but we had, maybe a kind of pleasantly, I don't know, almost harmonious part of the eye of the storm in the middle of the week. Now, as we get to Friday, Moon enters Aries, and this intensifies things for multiple reasons. Okay, one is because, well, first of all, let's just take it for what it is. Aries is an intense sign. It's ruled by Mars, and we have a lot of planets ruled by Mars right now. You know, Venus, Sun, and Mercury are in Scorpio. I know I said that a million times, but Scorpio is ruled by Mars. And, you know, with Moon now entering Aries, you know, about halfway through the day, Eastern Standard Time. Looks like a little bit later than that, actually, like afternoon, maybe late afternoon Eastern Standard Time. You know, now we'll have not only Venus, Sun, and Mercury, but also the Moon, all ruled by Mars. So, like, almost all the inner planets, the fastest moving bodies, which have to do with our day-to-day experience, they're all in kind of Martian energy. So, in case you're not familiar, you know, all this Mars focus, martial focus, it means that, you know, we're experiencing Mars energy. So, Mars energy is ambitious, it's competitive, it's ruthless, it's cunning, you know, it's masculine oriented, so we're wanting to be dominant, or to, I don't know, it's also very much focused on survival, and competition. Is, you know, we have to rise up to the challenges before us. So anyway, so all of that is to say, this definitely intensifies things, but also at this point now, the moon is only one sign away from the full moon lunar eclipse that will be in next week's forecast. So at this point, the moon is gaining light. It's looking, you know, it's definitely not full yet, but it's most of the way there. So we will, you know, you can feel this. You can feel this a few days before the full moon lunar eclipse. It's feeling like it's getting more intense. There's more energy, you know, and the moon, the lunar energy, the lunacy, you know, it can be very vividly felt. You know, I think, you know, even people that aren't into astrology know about this, like more accidents happening. Like, I think it's very tangible, like kids and pets especially, which already have a lot of energy usually, are all rowdy. You know, everyone is up later usually as we approach a full moon. So because this is a full moon lunar eclipse that we are gradually approaching, we're definitely going to feel this early on, especially because moon is in Aries, which is already such a amplified, outgoing type of energy, very fiery. So anyway, all that is to say, on Friday, things are intensifying again. They've been intense all week. You know, we really experienced a big uptick on Tuesday with the first quarter moon, and then the week was pretty intense all week, very interesting. But then now Friday, you know, maybe when you thought it couldn't get weirder or more intense, it's intensifying, it's ramping up, and it will continue to do so over the weekend. Oh, one last thing. I also wanted to mention, so before the moon enters Aries, before the moon enters Aries, first half of the day, Eastern Standard Time, it will cross over Jupiter. So this is kind of interesting. Jupiter has just entered Pisces retrograde. It's now in domicile there, but it's still retrograde. So moon crossing over Jupiter, it does bring about some kind of abundance. You know, it channels that Jupiterian energy, which has to do with abundance and prosperity, fortune, etc., and expansion of the mind and soul, etc., all that. But at the same time, we have to keep in mind Jupiter's still retrograde, so its energy is not felt so directly. It's more obscure, it's more ethereal, it's spiritual, it's in our, you know, our subconscious. So, you know, and then also the moon is channeling this. Moon is how we are feeling. It's, you know, the emotions, the instincts we're going through on a day-to-day basis. So it's kind of interesting. I mean, it's definitely, you know, positive if you want to boil it down that much. You know, it's something about some kind of expansion we'll feel on an emotional level. But I just wanted to point that out. I think this could be really great for maybe having some kind of epiphany in the first half of the day, or realization. It's also very interesting because Jupiter is still at 29 degrees Pisces. This is the last degree of the entire zodiac. So moon, in other words, moon and Jupiter will be conjunct for a brief moment at the very last degree of the whole cycle. So this is a really great point for realizing things, having epiphanies, but I wouldn't characterize them as like cerebral types of epiphanies having to do with like logic and information. It's more sentimental. It's very emotional and personal. and subjective even at the very last degree, because this is like the death point. It's very personal. It's the death of the whole cycle in a way. It's the point to prepare you for the immense new beginning that always happens with Aries. And this isn't like a super, super big deal. It's just the moon we're talking about. Moon crosses over this point every month. But still, crossing over Jupiter, there could just be some kind of moment in the first half of the day where, you feel something that can be very telling or very moving or enlightening in some kind of way. Saturday, November 5th, we have a couple things going on. So let's start out with moon is still in Aries. It's going to cross over Chiron this afternoon, so that could bring about a little bit of awkwardness, and to be honest, I'm going to brush kind of by that because we have bigger fish to fry. Chiron's energies can be a little bit subtle, and there's so much more dramatic things going on, so I'm gonna talk about some other things happening here. Saturday, as we start out the weekend here, we have the sun crossing over the south node. You can see that pretty visibly here. Sun and south node both at 13 degrees Scorpio. And just a little piece of trivia, if we had a new moon or a full moon on this exact day, it would be a full new moon solar eclipse, or a full an exact full moon lunar eclipse. It'd be an exact eclipse. So in other words, like the whole sun would be blocked out by the moon, or the whole moon would be blocked out by the earth. Whichever type of eclipse it was, it would be exact if we had one on this day. We don't have one on this day, of course, so we're not going to get an exact eclipse for this season, but we still will get partial eclipses, of course, so those are still very intense. But I just wanted to point that out here. This marks the midpoint of eclipse season. Sun crossing over the south node. This also marks kind of like a dark point again, as any planet crosses through the south node, it can be somewhat dark. It doesn't have to be bad necessarily, but it is dark in nature. That's something that someone who read my tarot taught me, that darkness does not have to be bad. It doesn't have to be like evil necessarily. Like, we all have darkness within us, and we have to accept that on some level. So anyway, the south node, as I talked about in my last forecast, it represents this point where the moon, or all planets have a nodal axis as well, but it represents a point where planets plunge below the plane that they're usually on. Our solar system is usually on a plane, or like a disk, so to speak, but the planets do kind of bob up and down, above and below that disk, and when they bob below it, they plunge below it. That point where they plunge below it is the south node. And, as you could kind of expect, like metaphorically, it is, dark in nature. You're plunging below, you're going into the underworld, you're dealing with, some less than pleasurable themes, especially in transit like this. So anyway, all that is to say, this can bring about a focus on the darker aspects of our reality. Again, this is happening in Scorpio. So Scorpio is fundamentally a kind of pessimistic sign. It wants to, figure out, it feels out of control. So it feels like it has to figure out all of its surroundings and everything that's going on. It wants to know everything, because doing so will sort of help to make it feel in control. So this is something we can observe with, people who are dominated by, Scorpio types of placements. But this is something we're all experiencing. We're all going through this transit of Sun and Scorpio crossing over the south node. So we're all kind of taking on a little bit of that energy. And what that looks like for each of us is obviously going to be very different. How each of us experiences Scorpio season is going to be vastly different. But for all of us, this is what's going on. So anyway, we're kind of taking a look at these darker or more subtle parts of our reality. This could be really excellent for learning something new, potentially, especially emotionally. Scorpio does want to learn everything. We want to figure everything out in Scorpio, so that can be really great for learning about the world, learning about textbook type of information, like book smart, so to speak, information. But fundamentally, this is emotional. It's a water sign, of course. So I don't know. I think you may learn something about your life, something emotional, something about relationships, something about how you support yourself emotionally. Besides emotions, Scorpio also has to do with, how do we support ourselves financially as well, or, with our time, our energy, our money. What do we invest in? What kind of relationships do we invest in? What do we invest in financially? All of that, you may learn some truths that are unexpected, shocking, and they require change. They require you to make change. And that's, I think, the downside of epiphany and awakening, is that it can be a burden, because when you realize more information, when you have a greater perspective, it requires responsibility on your part, because then there's a decision. Do you need to make a change, and if so, what are you going to do? Also on Saturday, we have Venus opposing Uranus. I feel like all of these aspects that are going on this week are kind of like echoes, or they're sort of like similar to what's going to go on for the new moon, or excuse me, for the full moon lunar eclipse in next week's forecast. The reason being is because in next week's forecast, for the full moon lunar eclipse, we're going to have Sun and Mercury opposing Uranus. So just before that, Venus first initiates this aspect, this opposition with Uranus. And this is where it keeps getting more interesting and more intense. Okay, so let me just start just by focusing on Venus opposing Uranus. So Venus again represents pleasure, desire, abundance, all this like really light and like kind of fluffy stuff. Again, Venus is debilitated in Scorpio, so all of our pleasure and desire and abundance is going to be found in more obscure ways, maybe a little bit harder to find. We may have to work a little extra hard for these things, but they can be definitely found. Now, as Venus opposes Uranus, this means that this throws a monkey wrench into the whole thing. Like, this brings even more unpredictability. So things that we once valued may dramatically change. You may have new values. You may no longer value what you previously valued. This has huge implications financially for the economy, for the stock market. But more specifically on an individual level, this just represents changes to how you support yourself. And again, I just kind of outlined this. How do you support yourself? How do you build a foundation, especially emotionally? What does it all take for you to feel emotionally secure in your life on a really deep level? And for all of us, kind of just in a little bit of a basic outlook, I think for all of us, we have to have some kind of financial security and emotional security with, relationships with the people in our lives. We're social creatures, among other things. And then, from there, it looks different for everyone. Usually we have some kind of like savings or something to fall back on in a time of need or hardship. So my point is, all of that is going to have all of those areas may likely have a high degree of change, really with this whole time in general. But specifically, this is one aspect that's going to bring it out, especially on Saturday. And this may just be one part of something larger that's happening with all of this. Because again, like I said, all of these aspects are kind of similar. They're all dealing with themes, really kind of blowing up the Scorpio-Taurus axis, having to do with how we support ourselves in this world. How do we survive? How do we rely on, what do we invest in, I guess would be a better way to put it. And again, something I've said in the past is this is discomforting because the Scorpio-Taurus axis, having to do with how we support ourselves, this is a fixed axis. We like to keep this consistent and steady, stable. That's how, we like to keep our relationships stable. We like to keep our money stable. But that's why it can be especially alarming when these aspects come along and change everything so dramatically. It doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. That's the whole point of astrology. That's why we look to these things, so we know, so we can not be caught off guard, I guess. Roll with the punches, be open, have a plan in place, but also be open to that plan changing a little bit. You know what I mean? That's all I'll kind of say for Saturday, really. Moving forward to Sunday, November 6th. I like how I said that's all I'll say for Saturday after like a huge rant and ramble. But anyway, Sunday, November 6th, Mercury is following in Venus and the Sun's footsteps. Mercury crosses over the South Node at 13 degrees Scorpio. And notice how close Mercury and the South Node, for that matter, are both to the sun at this point. They're pretty much conjunct. South Node and Mercury at 13 degrees Scorpio, Sun at 14 degrees Scorpio. So we are on the eve of the full moon lunar eclipse pretty much at this point. It's going to happen at 16 degrees Scorpio. In other words, it's going to happen in 2 days, basically. So everything is kind of starting to line up. I really can't overstate how much of a big deal this is. This is the biggest thing that's happened really all year. I've been talking about this since June. So I don't want to get too excited, but Mercury crossing over the South Node. Mercury represents our intellect, our mental focus, our speech, our communication. All the kind of thoughtful, analytical processes. It also represents like kind of the rhythm of the day, like, your errands, your connections, social connections, your activities throughout the day. So all of that, symbolized by Mercury. Mercury's crossing over the South Node. So there's this kind of like twist of fate with all that. So pay special attention to, what you hear or information you come across. Also, just in general, this could indicate a lot of like frenetic energy. So like static energy, like lots of little changes happening. This could also represent like an overstimulation of the mind, so much mental energy. Mercury in Scorpio is already kind of overly stimulated. Scorpio is not only a very intuitive, emotional sign, it's also very analytical. So Mercury, symbolizing our mental processes, already has a lot to deal with in Scorpio, which, is not totally bad. It can be exciting and fun to be so, turned on, like mentally speaking, turned on to all these thought processes and being so observant and intuitive. So it's very exciting. It's a lot to deal with. Mercury crossing over the South Node, though, could be too much mental stimulation. So, enjoy it, go with the flow, do what you can, obviously. But I would say maybe just be aware, especially if you have a lot of Mercury in your chart or if you're prone to mental burnout, maybe just, relax, take breaks. Like, it doesn't hurt to take breaks with whatever you're doing. I think there could be a lot of activity right now in general. But yeah, just take breaks, pause, reflect. These are water energies after all, so they do have to deal with, like, I don't want to say like endings, but like kind of lull times or sort of periods of rest. But that's kind of a contradiction because Scorpio is such an action-oriented sign at the same time. But still, it's water. Water has to do with emotion and intuition. So my point is, it doesn't hurt to take a step back every once in a while, come up for a breath of air, and just relax a little bit if you can. I say that knowing that it's going to be a very intense time for pretty much almost all of us. But, just if you can just take breaks and engage in slower activities from time to time if you can. That will help to maintain your mental health, especially on Sunday. And we end this forecast with the moon still cruising on through Aries, so still a lot of action-oriented signs, very competitive, a lot of friction. It's a lot of sexual energy too. Mars has to do with sexuality. Scorpio and Aries are both, of course, ruled by Mars, so it's a dynamic time. There's a lot going on. I'm going to wrap this up. That's what I have for you for this week. But yeah, very dynamic, a lot going on. Very stimulating. If you were bored before, if you were in a rut or were complacent, this is going to be exactly what you need. This is going to electrify you and, provoke you to, make some change, like feel something, do something, be alive, and if you've already, if you were on the other side of things, you're already overwhelmed before this, and this is the last thing you need, I would really encourage you, like, this might sound a little woo-woo or kind of like, I don't know, whatever, but I don't view any of this as bad. I try my best not to view it as good or bad necessarily, because it's an oversimplification. This is just change. There are periods where there's not as much change. There's periods where there's not as much for me to say in these forecasts, like much of the summer was. Now this is just a time of increased activity and change. So just roll with it. It's not going to be perfect. It's going to be a little messy. But that's what life is. That's the beauty of it. So just roll with it. Be open. we will all be fine. You'll be fine. Anyway, very interesting. Next week, we of course get that full moon lunar eclipse that I've been talking about in this forecast. At the same time, for that, Sun will be conjunct Mercury, and both the Sun and Mercury will be opposing Uranus at the same time. Well, okay, let me put it this way: Sun and Mercury will be conjunct, and they'll be both opposing Moon and Uranus, which will also be conjunct. So involving, a full moon lunar eclipse with both Mercury and Uranus involved at the same time. Super interesting stuff. I can't wait to tell you more about it, but that's what I have for you for this week. So I really just wish you all the best and look forward to talking to you again. And again, if you are interested in a reading or just want to talk to me for whatever reason, my information is in the description below. But thanks for listening.